If you think you're going to get into some of those top 10, 20, 30 schools without some kind of test, I don't think that's going to happen. Strong scores do matter quite a lot. I do want you to have a map to feel like you know the landscape enough to make a choice on that map for yourself, as opposed to going it alone and feeling I'll just apply to everywhere in the top 20. That's not a strategy anymore. You need a map to understand where all of these pieces are going to likely fall based on the type of student that you are. We've been tracking demographic shifts for years. Data for a college is quite powerful.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. For those of you listening, if you've spent any time looking up college admissions advice lately, whether it be on Google, TikTok, Reddit, or even on group chats with other parents, you've probably felt how overwhelming it can be. Everybody has their own take on things. Everybody sounds really confident in what they're sharing. And somehow the advice is completely different depending on who you ask. So today's episode is really about cutting through that noise. So instead of opinions or fear-based headlines, we're going to be focusing on what the numbers actually show. And I have the perfect guest joining me today, Lindsey, editor-in-chief at InGenius Prep, and also the lead behind the InGenius Journal. Hi, Lindsey. Excited to have you with us today. How are you?
Doing well. Thank you so much, Jillian. This is a pleasure, and I'm excited to be able to talk more about the journal with our listeners.
So, for our listeners who may not know you just yet, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do at InGenius Prep?
My name is Lindsey Kundel. I'm the editor-in-chief of the InGenius Journal, and that's a relatively new role here at InGenius. What we're trying to do right now is translate data so that all families, not just our InGenius families, but that all families can make better, well-informed decisions when it comes to their children. So what am I doing? I'm trying to translate all of the college admissions data that our team sees across institutions, across countries, across years into something that families can actually use. Prior to this, I've been in educational marketing for a number of years, in international schools, in domestic schools in the United States. But this really isn't a marketing project, truth be told. What we're trying to do is a little bit more journalistic and data analysis driven.
That's a very important part of your work, and we're so glad to have you. So, before we get into the InGenius Journal itself, I kind of want to zoom out for a second and talk about the bigger picture. So, you're obviously looking at institutional data on a day to day basis and trends across different types of universities across the globe and domestically in the US. So, what do you think families misunderstand most about how admissions actually works?
I think that admissions has become an extremely emotional decision for many families. It's not just about which school their child is going to attend, it's about what their future that their child is going to have. And as a result of all of this emotional laden feeling, which is understandable, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to say it's wrong to feel for your child's future. But as a result, I feel like families are drowning in this marketing space, and companies, I should say institutions, are able to take advantage of many families with their marketing approach. So what we want to do with the InGenius Journals project is help families get away from all of that marketing speak that colleges are going to throw at them and instead have them grounded in data. So many times you'll see both at InGenius and in other college admission spaces telling parents to go to the common data set for their institution, or telling parents to go look at X, Y, and Z, go look at this PDF, go look at this report. But instead of telling parents to go do that research themselves, we've realized that why don't we do that research for them? Colleges right now are drowning in their own data. They are really paying attention to enrollment modeling. They're having yield predictions, pricing strategy. Colleges know the data very well and are able to take advantage of that when it comes to selling colleges to parents. But we're trying to close this gap because right now I feel like there is a gap between what colleges understand and what parents understand. I really truly believe, after working in K through 12 and in higher education for a while, that parents deserve to understand the system that you're paying into. I don't want parents to make this purely emotional decision. I want them to have all of the facts before they start making these decisions with their child. I feel like we want to use data obsessively the way that colleges are doing.
Building off of that, why do you think there's so much conflicting advice out there right now when it comes to college admissions? It is a very noisy space. And there's so much misinformation spreading out there, to be honest, and parents are getting really confused. So, what do you think there's so many conflicting advice out there?
I think that when it comes to anecdotes and that emotional attachment I was talking about earlier, when it comes to college admissions, oh, my cousin's brother got into Harvard, all of these different anecdotal examples that we have from everyday life, they feel very powerful. They feel human, and we're able to connect to them so closely because we know somebody or we know somebody who knows somebody. But the truth is that if you know somebody who knows somebody, that geographic proximity actually has an effect on your child's ability to get into Harvard or other institutions of that caliber. So, what I think we're trying to do with the journal is help parents understand all of the different factors that go into specific institutions. Because here I am talking about Harvard, but Harvard's institutional priorities and the way that they are admitting their classes is different than Yale, or is different than U Chicago, is different than my alma mater, Northwestern. So being able to talk about institutional priorities, not just on a macro scale, but on a micro scale, each individual institutions and what they are looking for, that's important for parents to understand before their children apply. I've worked with young adults who have been applying to a broad swath of very prestigious colleges, top 10, top 20 colleges in the United States primarily. But if you don't understand how Brown admits their children, or young adults rather, compared to the Harvards of the world, then you're really missing out on a huge part of the story. I understand that anecdotal evidence feels like, oh, okay, if I know somebody, then my child can do it. But unfortunately, it's not that simple anymore. You really do need to understand all of the strategic priorities for each institution.
I think parents are really just searching out there and trying to communicate with other parents to get that reassurance, right?
Of course. And that makes sense. My most recent role prior to InGenius, I was working in an important international school in Taiwan. And one of the first years I was working there, I heard about a spreadsheet that the parents of that year's junior and senior class were keeping. The parents were doing this college admissions data work, trying to figure out, okay, historically, this school was able to get this number of students into Harvard and this number of students into Yale. And we heard this other school down south, oh, they just got somebody into wherever. So they were trying to run the numbers for themselves. And while I really appreciate their go-getterness and I appreciate how important it was to them to try to understand this data for themselves, my hope is that the journal, different projects like this can help clarify what it is that is going on behind the scenes, not just with the top 10, top 20 institutions, but really the whole college admissions moving puzzle piece, because it moves and it moves yearly, it moves even quarterly, depending on the region. So that's what we're trying to do here.
So when parents or students go searching for help online, like you just mentioned earlier, whether that's on TikTok, blogs,
Mhm.
Reddit, or just like Googling late at night, what kind of information are they actually finding? And most importantly, what are they not getting?
Yikes. They're finding, at least on TikTok, I would say they're mostly finding student stories, right? And some of those are beautiful stories of students who are being admitted to different institutions. Some of them are also horror stories. And just like we need to remember with any type of social media marketing, you are getting outliers on social media. You are not getting the broad swath of the college admissions experience. You are getting what is viral. You are getting what the algorithm is able to detect you would like. Social media can be so seductive, not just in this space, but in any type of advertising and marketing space, that I think what we're trying to do is just push back against that a little bit. There are some college admissions influencers who are becoming more and more prominent on TikTok and on social media outlets. But you are, generally speaking, not getting expert advice. You are not getting former admissions officers demystifying the college admissions process at their former institution. So you have to be very careful. And my hope is that families can try to remember that. Obviously, it's easy for me to say, but I know from being on all of these different platforms, it's tricky. It's tricky to tell what's real, what's not. It's tricky to tell who to believe on all of these different forms right now. And that's true even from parents, because parents use social media to talk to one another about their cousin's hairdresser's stepson's experience.
It is a pretty scary space out there to navigate. Do you feel like the admission space has gotten louder over the last few years? More content, more opinions? And if so, what do you think really changed?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel like one of the inflection points had to have been right around the pandemic when test optional policies became a little bit more of the norm. And I have to say a little bit more because we're pushing back right now and going into a less test optional world. I think that there's been a lot of rankings volatility with World News Report. So some schools are moving in rather big gaps. And that's not quite as true for the top 10 or top 20. There have been some big moves. But when we're talking about top 30 and top 50, there have been some massive moves and schools have reacted quite aggressively. So, yes, I think that it's getting louder, but I think that social media in general is making everyone a little bit louder in that yes, this topic is getting louder, but I feel like post pandemic our lives are so interwoven on social media for many people that it is just the norm to talk about the things that are on your mind. And if college admissions is on your mind, then you're going to talk about it. But that being said, there is a lot to talk about. We're not even talking about this year's visa issues with President Trump or the funding dilemmas that are going on in many of our top domestic universities right now. So there is quite a lot to talk about.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's true. Everybody is online, and so many organizations or companies position themselves as experts in this college admission space and influencers. From your perspective, what does real expertise actually look like in this space?
I feel like real expertise is knowing when just this blanket advice won't work anymore. If you have expertise, you need to understand markets, not just individual schools. You need to be able to see patterns across thousands of students. You need to see patterns across cycles. And you need to be honest and transparent when things change. And I think that a lot of influencers or so called admissions experts, because they want to drive you to their sales funnel, they aren't necessarily going to tell you when things disrupt patterns or when they might be a little dishonest at times or package things in a way where they're not lying to you, but they're going to make it seem like, oh, this will actually be a boon to you in some way. So you can't rely on historic markers of brand and prestige. You can't just rely on social media presence. You need to look for transparency. I guess maybe that, as I'm like talking through this with you, maybe that's really what parents should be looking for in any advice. If and when something changes, is a company, is an institution going to be real with you about it? And if they have that kind of honest take, yeah, then maybe they're worth their salt.
And speaking of transparency, when families cannot tell what's credible versus what's marketing, how does that ultimately affect the way they approach their decision making process?
They're going to overspend. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, but they will overspend and or they will have their hearts broken. Because I think that when families can't tell what's real, if they don't look at common data sets, if they aren't looking at the larger picture domestically and internationally, because the international market has huge ramifications for domestic admissions, they will overspend. They will for sure chase prestige, sometimes to positive and sometimes to less positive results. And I think that they're going to follow trends, possibly a little bit too late when it comes to benefiting their specific child. In my opinion, right now, college admissions is starting to look a little bit like the luxury good market in not so great ways. There are some good things about it. Price and scarcity definitely are continuing to affect how people feel about institutions, right? If it costs a certain amount and if it's harder to get into, it must be better, right? It just must be. And sometimes that's true and sometimes it isn't. But data can help families choose true outcomes instead of aesthetics.
Yeah. What's a common admissions narrative you see circulating online that just completely falls apart when you actually look at the numbers?
As someone who's worked internationally in a K through 12 school, I think there's this false belief that international students are disappearing. It's not true. They're not disappearing. Things have changed a lot since the pandemic, and it looks like they're about to change quite a lot this coming year as well, due to certain political issues that have come up within the last year. I don't think international students are shrinking. I do think they're shifting, and which parts of the world are committed to a US college experience for themselves, that definitely is shifting. There's a lot of buzz right now, or like narratives right now online, also about this test optional world. And as I mentioned earlier, test optional in a lot of cases no longer is optional. They might still be labeling it as test optional, but I would say that's mostly false at this point, especially for listeners of this program. Your child is probably targeting a top 50, top 30, top something school. And as a result, I would say that narrative is mostly false. If you think you're going to get into some of those top 10, 20, 30 schools without some kind of evidence, some kind of test, I don't think that's going to happen. Strong scores do matter quite a lot right now, especially in these kind of chaotic post-pandemic years. Data for a college is quite powerful. It's an easy way to weed people out, unfortunately. I guess maybe about rankings for narratives. There was a parent that I worked at my previous institution that just flat out told me if a college isn't ranked in a certain way, then it's not a quality educational institution. And I really had to think about that for a while, but there is quite a lot that goes into the methodology of different rankings. And so I think it's really important that parents, when they research World News Report, or when they research Wall Street Journal's best schools for X, you do really need to look into the methodology. A favorite little factoid that I love to drop at dinner parties. Clearly, don't invite me to a dinner party. Otherwise, these are the types of facts you're going to get. Alumni giving, so fundraising metrics, were a key part of the methodology for World News Report up until 2023. Just 2 years ago, how much your alumni gave back to your institution was a part of this educational quality metric. Really, this is a narrative that we need to leave behind in the dust. Rankings are interesting. Rankings are an easy way for us to talk about some aspects of educational attainment, but it's not cut and dried like that. Speaking as somebody who has attended Ivy League institutions and large public state schools, because for the season of life I was in, certain things made sense.
This also really leads perfectly into the InGenius Journal. You
Mhm.
said before that data has always been central to how InGenius Prep operates, not just in terms of outcomes, but how we advise families from day to day. So, what does that actually look like in practice?
One of the beautiful things about InGenius, when I first joined, I found out that we had a person in charge of all of our data. We have a person that I could go and talk to get all of this data for years and years. What an incredible resource. What an amazing thing for an institution to have. For sure, as an institution, we have been tracking global movement. We have been tracking acceptance patterns across different, I would say, like student persona types. We've been tracking demographic shifts for years. Essentially, we were tracking data to become better advisors. And that's wonderful. And now in my role, I am able to draw from these years and years of data collection that we have, and not just about our students, but also globally looking at larger data samples in the United States, in the United Kingdom, Australia. I'm hoping to do a larger European collection pretty soon here. We really here are trying to track, I would say, global movement because our students are all over the world. And that now is going to benefit our readers of the journal. And I just love that we didn't even start this for that. We did it so that we could become better educators. I love that. So what we're doing right now, or what I'm doing rather, is I'm taking what we already were using internally and publishing in a way that families can read, digest, and understand for themselves. Parents have access to the resources that we have. If you're interested in InGenius beyond that, wonderful. And if not, you now are a slightly more informed person, and we hope that it benefits you.
Yeah, I think it is truly an exciting part of the work. And at InGenius Prep, we also have the largest team of former admissions officers, like you rightfully mentioned earlier, in the industry. And these are people who've worked across public universities, private institutions, liberal arts colleges, and also at international admissions offices. So, how does that collective and lived in experience shape the analysis and insights that go into the work with the InGenius Journal?
It's absolutely crucial to be able to send a quick email off to our FAO from Harvard or our FAO from Chicago or our FAO from the California system, to be able to gut check some of my findings against people who've actually worked in those institutions has been absolutely crucial. The FAOs here at InGenius, they're crucial to understanding how InGenius works. I love that we have the largest FAO team in the industry. We have many FAOs who are in charge of entire regions of the world. To have somebody who is in charge of all of India, for example, that is a very specific lens that parents need to know about and that I now, as the journal editor-in-chief, have access to. But obviously, if you chose to work with InGenius, you would also have access to. So it's so unique to see this lived-in lens of how decisions are made. I remember watching a parent presentation earlier this year where they were talking about how Brown had someone based in New Hampshire. It was just this one person, and they made decisions for 4 different states in the New England region. And there was just this one person who's making these decisions about whether or not your child is going to attend that institution. And that's fascinating to know that there are these specific individuals, and now we have some of them.
Yeah, it is very interesting. And we talked a lot about the journal and the work that we do to make it happen and to give this resource free to everybody. Can you give us a sneak peek into some of the topics you've already published research on and maybe take us a little bit behind the scenes? What goes into creating a truly data backed journal like this and why that level of rigor is so important in an industry that's often driven by opinions?
I'll talk a little bit about process first. I try to treat this as a newsroom. And so we collect data first. I go through different forms of data with a fine-tooth comb. I run different types of analyses using programs that I have on my computer. And then I compare a lot of these different numbers and trends that I'm seeing with what the FAOs are currently seeing with students here, what they have seen in different years, what our InGenius data says from previous years. And then after all of that comparison, I try to write stories. And so that's really important, that it's not like I'm coming to my quote unquote newsroom, which is my computer. I'm not coming to my newsroom with the idea already formed. I might have general questions that I want to be answered. So I want to know more about Chinese enrollment patterns in the United States from X to Y years. So that's a question that I might have. But I don't know the answer to it until I'm looking at many different forms of data, whether that be common data sets or F1 visas, open doors data sets. The question is there. And as a journalist, I'm collecting information to then answer the question. And sometimes those answers will then lead to subsequent journals. And then when it comes to things we've already covered, one of the largest topics that we've covered recently is what I'm calling the global enrollment matriculation analysis, global patterns in international student enrollment in the United States. So who is coming to the United States? Where are they coming from? And why are they coming from those regions? Why are they coming to the United States now? That's the overarching question for this series. And I have 13, possibly 14 journals that are trying to answer that very large question. Because when you ask such a large question, it's not like I can answer each country of the world necessarily. So I'm taking it region by region. Certain countries do deserve their own journals, or in China's edition, we've got 3 right now, but I'm probably going to add a 4th or a 5th because there are just so many topics that come up when you start looking at the data from a specific lens like that. And to be clear, we're only talking about the years 2022 through 2024. That is our current largest topic on the journal, but for sure there will be more, because when you think about historic data, so prior to 2022, when you think about more current data after 2024, of course, there are going to be shifts that we need to look at. Other topics that we've looked at are trends in the admissions world right now, some of which I've referenced within this podcast. So, what's going on with test optional, what's going on with FAFSA, because there have been a lot of issues with FAFSA in the last few years, what's going on with all of this rankings volatility, what's going on with the Common App. There are lots of trends that we needed to unpack in terms of 2024. And of course, what does that mean for future editions? 2025, 2026, what's going on with admissions? What grounds our decision-making process is doing a lot of research from official sources. I'm trying to look at the data first and figure out how that might affect our very international readers, or at this point, listeners here at InGenius.
I guess without giving too much away, can you give us a preview about what families will find in your recent work with the InGenius Journal, especially around the global matriculation project that you recently mentioned? What were some of the big picture trends you uncovered, and what surprised you the most as you were analyzing the data?
I was really surprised that Africa as a region right now is not getting a little bit more media attention. That was one of my sort of moments where I needed to figure out what's going on with the media and why are we not talking about this. Right now, there is a huge jump in enrollment trends for, I would say, especially sub-Saharan Africa, that when I am looking online, I'm not seeing a lot of other media sources cover this. Other things that were really interesting to me, I guess because we had been talking about China so much already, might as well continue on that thread. I was very interested in how Chinese enrollment trends right now are following in the footsteps of classes before them. For some interesting reason, there are some like really big public flagships that are very popular with Chinese students. And that's true for these 2 years that we analyzed, but also for years previous. So the NYUs, the USCs of the world, the UIUCs of the world, these like large public flagships have enormous numbers of Chinese students enrolling there year after year. And I feel like personally, many of these students might be missing out on other schools that are just like interesting and that would love to take them. I think that, yes, these are very large schools and they can handle a very large international student population. But when I contrast the enrollment trends of China mainland students with India, for example, I think that there were like 100 and something distinct institutions that Chinese students enroll to. They all stick together in these 100 institutions, whereas Indian students were enrolling in like 300 different institutions. It could be even more. I don't want to misquote myself. Knock on wood that I at least got in the ballpark. But so Indian students, by contrast, we're still talking about a large number of students who are enrolling in US institutions, but they are going to a wide, diverse range of institutions as opposed to this Chinese trend of sticking. There are many reasons for this. I'm not here to analyze the psychology or cultural choices that are going on here that lead to these decisions. But I do make some guesses in the journal and you can read for more. But I think that's interesting to see how even when students are showing up in large numbers, so India and China are the two largest groups of students who enroll in domestic universities, to see these very large groups operate in very different ways. It's just interesting to me.
Yeah. I guess when we started building the InGenius Journal, it was clear it couldn't look or feel like a typical education newsletter or email blast, even. So I guess we were aiming for something closer to a McKinsey or BCG, Bloomberg, very
Mhm.
clean, minimal, data forward. From your perspective, why was it so important for the journal to feel like a real research publication?
Design signals how serious something is. I think that if it looks like research, if it looks like it's not selling you something, then people allow themselves to get comfortable. They allow themselves to lean in. They allow themselves to read slower, to think about it. Some of these journals that I've been writing in Google Docs, they're 20, 30, 40, 50 pages long in Google Docs. And we're publishing them on this website, not as an ebook. So you do need to leave some time and space for readers to think through all of the implications of this data. But we're not trying to put a paywall on it. We're not trying to block it from anyone. We want them to be able to trust it and to easily share it with other adults. I think it's essential that we did this kind of clean, minimal data first layout. The charts and tables that we use are very important and they're not decorative in terms of the design. I think ultimately parents deserve something easy to use that still respects their intelligence and just allows them to focus on the words and numbers in front of them. This is not built to sell, it's built to inform.
actually had a look at the journals, and I would say I'm really impressed. I really hope that families really go and check it out because there's so much information there that would be so helpful to this crazy college admission space. And especially for families who are so anxious out there, not necessarily because the application process itself is impossible, but because they don't know what information to trust. When someone sits down and reads the InGenius Journal, what do you hope they feel afterward?
Everything you've just said, it resonates with me so deeply. I'm a somewhat new mother, and I have 17 years before I'm navigating this landscape with my child. But I feel like what I'm trying to do is help provide a map to help families orient themselves in this very scary world right now when it comes to college admissions. I want them to feel not lost. So I don't want them to say found, right? Because the journey is the process or whatever. We don't know exactly where your child is going to school yet. But I do want you to have a map to feel like you know the landscape enough to make a choice on that map for yourself, as opposed to going it alone and feeling I'll just apply to everywhere in the top 20 and that is enough. That'll get me in. Because the unfortunate reality is that's not a strategy anymore. You need a map to understand where all of these pieces are going to likely fall based on the type of student that you are. And unfortunately, you are being assigned some kind of category or persona from the college perspective. So I want parents to feel like they have this map, that they are oriented. I want them to feel grounded and less overwhelmed by the amount of data that they could ingest themselves, that someone is here with them to do some pre-digesting, as it were. I want them to feel empowered, that they don't have to be as scared of the competitiveness of the college admissions landscape, that they can be empowered by understanding how colleges are making these decisions so that they can make their own decisions too, so that they feel like their choices are impacting the outcome as opposed to just like letting the chips fall, as it were.
Why is transparency in admissions more important now than ever?
The stakes have never been higher. So when we talk about just the sheer numbers of applicants, when we talk about the number of institutions that students are applying to, obviously both of those numbers have gone up. So I think that the information gap has never been wider when it comes to what do rankings mean, and colleges are not explaining their strategy or their marketing approach. So I think that families deserve to see things transparently, not just from InGenius. They deserve to see it, this like larger landscape for themselves. And we are here trying to, for some families, connect the dots. We're just one aspect that can help. We're talking about the money that's going to be spent on tuition. We're talking about all of their livelihood costs, things like that. But we're also talking about return on investment in your child's future. My hope is for parents to be like less seduced by the marketing that's happening around them so that they can weave in between all of these different things and make choices for themselves that actually make sense for their child. We know that rankings right now influence behavior a lot. Schools are doing quite a lot to protect their ranking. Some schools are doing that and educating their students, and some schools are really prioritizing saving the ranking. And so knowing which type of institution this is important.
Looking ahead, what is next for the InGenius Journal? Are you imagining a monthly or a quarterly rhythm? What kind of themes, questions, or trends are you most excited to explore next?
So for myself, just like within this little newsroom team, my goal is always to try to publish, I would say, at least twice a month. And again, we're talking about very hard-hitting, long-form journalistic series. So we have tentatively finished our geographic analysis series, and that covered China, India, the Middle East. We did a group one on the European Union, UK, and Russia. I know that's contentious. Don't worry, we addressed the contention. We did one entire piece on the African region. We talked about Central and South America together. We did several pieces on North America, meaning Canada, Mexico, and the United States, but then also some that were just on each intra-regional mobility within the United States. And then most recently, I've published what I'm calling a global synthesis. So all of the major findings across all of these regions, putting them together because they do affect one another quite a lot. That one was fascinating because I was able to talk a little bit more about gender across all of these regions as a result. Other major themes that we've covered recently are court cases and ripple effects that we've seen from that affirmative action case. We've talked about, this one's really interesting, Genius Prep admissions results compared to the top high schools in the United States and the United Kingdom. And there are some statistics there that are extremely favorable to InGenius, and there are a few that aren't. So when we're talking about transparency, again, here's the data. Think through it for yourself, parents. Then we've talked about admissions trends, like I've said. Coming up, we're going to continue this pattern of geographic analysis. I would say we'll probably do that for sure on a biannual basis. If there are major jumps, I'll try to do it more frequently, but we have to follow the cadence of when these data sets are published. I want to do more institutional breakdowns. I feel like that's a major gap in space right now. So, especially when it comes to tuition, financial aid, whether or not financial aid is considered as a part of your admissions package, whether they're taking that into account, how they do that, because certain institutions do let it factor into your admissions profile, but they do it in what I would call a more holistic way, whereas some institutions, it truly is like a weed out. So I want to do a little bit more deeper institutional breakdowns. I want to break down public flagships versus liberal arts colleges versus these like top 10, top 20 highly rejected privates. I want to talk about how their like institutional priorities set their agendas for admissions. We did a little bit on this intra-regional mobility in the United States, but that was really interesting because there are some, what I'm going to call like a magnet state effect. So certain states are drawing in more students than other states. But at least if I'm doing my analysis correctly, these magnet states actually have changed quite a lot within the last decade. And so I want to talk more about this like historic magnet state trend. Where did people used to want to go a lot? And think about those anecdotes I was talking about earlier. So if it is an anecdote in your life and you had someone go to one of these former magnet states, but the trend is towards a different magnet state, we're talking about really different admissions kind of strategies that you would have to enact because a new magnet state might have more incentives to draw you in, maybe not. Got to do more analysis to find out. But I think all of that's really interesting within the United States. Right now, I guess I can say I'm doing a larger piece on admission statistics by major. The computer science and the STEM disciplines are more competitive to get into right now for fairly obvious reasons, especially when you're talking about like elite programs on either coast. But I want to go beyond that. Like many people just know, oh yeah, those are more competitive, but why? And how much more competitive? Are we talking about a couple of percentage points more competitive, or are we talking about it's unrealistic to get in? And so I want to do a pretty deep level analysis of admissions by major and hopefully draw out some like regional trends as well. We're entering into a new year here. I kind of want to look at like the last 25 years of admissions history. What have we learned? What has changed? What's the same? What can we use to predict the next 25? But I should also say, because we are a relatively new publication, if there are specific things that our parents, our listeners want to learn more about, they want someone to look at the data, I'm your girl, happy to do. We would love feedback and we would love suggestions. So that's just a little bit that's coming up, but very open to suggestions.
So many fun things coming our way. Yes, listeners, please do send your feedback. We always love hearing from you. And so, Lindsey, thank you again for being here and for the work that you're doing with the journal. It's such an incredible, valuable resource, especially in a space that can feel very overwhelming. So, to those listening, if you want to stay up to date, make sure to follow us on Instagram, YouTube, and Spotify. You can also read the InGenius Journal anytime on our website for free. All the links are in the description. And as always, if you're looking for personalized guidance that's grounded in research and real strategy, our InGenius team is always here for you. So thank you for listening, everyone, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.